Hey guys, this is Eric Vento on yet another episode of Government to Private, where we discuss the transition from various aspects of the government to the private sector. With me today is JT Mendoza. JT and I have known each other for quite some time, and I'm super excited to have him here with us today. Thanks for being willing to come on the show, JT.
No, thanks for having me, man. It's truly a humbling and definitely an honor and privilege to be able to join you today, and I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And, one thing I tell everybody is that you know, this is 30 to 45 minutes, but it impacts so many different people's lives through the years because they have a chance to look at it and say, that resonates with me. I understand that I'm not the only one going through that. And so if it helps one person understand that this transition process is attainable and that it's reasonable and that you can be successful, then it's worth it. So again, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I can't wait to jump in and learn more about your experience and your transition process and some words of wisdom that you have for people who are either considering a transition or currently in the throes of it. So let's go ahead and jump in. Can you give us just a high level overview of your background pre-corporate?
Yeah, definitely. So, I have pretty interesting, I guess, background in that, not unlike others, right? But I started out professionally serving in the U.S. military, and so really, and even within the military, I just thought about this. I even had, and this is actually one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about. We can get to later, but when I first joined the military, I was an intelligence analyst, and I was actually sitting at a computer with headphones on, really copying Morse code, if you can believe that. And so I share that because what I realized then, and for those that are listening, if you remember nothing else from this podcast, or you decide to shut it off now, what I realized then was that that was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Right? I'm an extrovert, and I love engaging people. I love talking to people, and sitting to a computer tied with headphones on for 12 hours a day. I was like, this is like hell on earth, man. It was like the Texas heat in the summer. It's like 30 days of 115-degree weather, right? So I was like, this is not what I want. And so luckily for me, I reached a point in sort of that early part of my career, being young professional, if you will, realizing this isn't what I want to do. And I didn't mean I was bad at it. I just didn't want to do it. And I was lucky enough to win an award, an annual award. And at that award ceremony, Air Force OSI was in attendance. And I found out later they attend these things to try to identify high caliber individuals to recruit for their organization, right? For those who may be familiar with or unfamiliar, I should say, with Air Force OSI, it's the Office of Special Investigations within the Department of Air Force that conducts felony level investigations, right? Everything from major level fraud to espionage and counterintelligence related issues. And so one of the agents approached me and was like, hey, we'd like to talk to you about an opportunity, started kind of explaining what Air Force OSI did. And at the time, because of what I did already for the Air Force, at the time, we were in the midst of the global war on terror, right? And I just wanted to do my part. I felt like, man, I need to be a part of this, right? But because of the world I was in within the IC, I could do that from 10,000 miles away. I didn't have to deploy, but again, I wanted to serve my country, and not to say that wouldn't have been serving, but I really wanted to be sort of boots on the ground. And so this OSI guy that was talking to me, everything he was saying just resonated with me. And I was like, I got to do this. I got to make this jump. And so I did that. And so, kind of a little transition within a transition, if you will. Right. And so, served as an enlisted member of the military for 11 and a half years. Really felt after that time, kind of a tug on my heart and where my family was at the time, it's just my wife and I, but just really felt like, I wanted my time serving in that capacity was over. And so I transitioned really after kind of cutting my teeth and growing up a little bit as a counterintelligence professional, I transitioned into government service. And I can tell you, even in that transition, I look back now, I actually was very, very close to accepting a corporate security position at that time. And man, I thank God I didn't, because I would have screwed up big time, because there was so much, and this really, Eric, this hits at why this type of resource and the work that you do is so important, right? There was so much I didn't know about corporate security. There were things I thought I knew, and I was actually so good at interviewing and with interpersonal skills that I had convinced the COO of a company that I will leave unnamed to hire me, right? And I mean, it was we had negotiated pay. It was more than I had made in my military service, right? Or at the time. I would have been fat, dumb, and happy, but I can tell you right now, I probably wouldn't have lasted 6 months. I probably would have gotten fired for screwing something up. And I think oftentimes we can get sort of that tunnel vision and think we know, right? Just because we're good at our jobs doesn't mean you know everything. And so anyway, so I did transition into federal government service. At the time, I got picked up by DSS, Defense Security Service. They've merged with OPM. They're now the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, and they're really the agency that services the cleared defense community. So your Lockheeds, Raytheons, all those type of companies. Anybody who has a classified contract or cleared contract to do work for the U.S. government. And they kind of oversee the security apparatus. They provide security assistance, counterintelligence assistance, so on and so forth. And so I went to work for them, did that for a number of years. I actually moved from the San Antonio area up to DC. And then in that role in DC, really expanded my network on a joint duty assignment where I spent time at FBI headquarters, also spent some time building relationships with others in the community. And then after that, I jumped over to Defense Intelligence Agency and really got a chance to spend more time kind of doing non-traditional sort of counterintelligence things, really operational things. And that was really around that time frame also when I got involved really in insider threat. It's when the U.S. government started to codify insider threat as a sub-discipline, if you will. I was really, again, lucky and privileged to be on the task force that drafted the executive order for insider threat and got that over to the White House and codified an executive order. So, so did that. I must have done something right. I got a job bringing me back home and rejoining really where, I had started professionally. I rejoined the Air Force, now obviously in a civilian capacity, but I came back home to San Antonio, Texas to help them really start to advance their insider threat program. And then that was the last position in my federal service. I was, one of two deputy directors over the insider threat hub here in San Antonio, Texas, and then transitioned into the public sector or the private sector. I'm sorry.
Awesome. I loved hearing that. I really like how you kind of played with the transition within a transition.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, they just assume that all public sector is the same.
Right.
When in reality, like, you can really change your job set pretty significantly. And transition is transitioning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, it matters whether we're talking about public versus private, but it's still a major life change.
Yeah, definitely.
And having the right mindset and preparing for that change, whatever the challenges may be, is very, very much, a part of our stories, and so I really appreciate that introspective look that you brought into this about, I had an opportunity. I didn't think I was ready. I probably wouldn't have lasted 6 months. And I think that's really important for a lot of people to understand, because if you don't do your research about these opportunities, like, getting a job offer is one of the most satisfying feelings in the world. It makes you feel valued. It makes you feel like almost like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like liberated, you
Yeah,
know,
definitely. There's definitely some
valid,
freedom,
yeah,
validated. Yeah, I was gonna say,
validated. Yes,
but there's some freedom in
that's
that.
what I was looking for, is like
Yeah.
validation,
Right.
but it doesn't mean that you should take it.
Exactly.
And it's like, and that's where, doing your research and really having an honest conversation with yourself of, okay, do I truly want this? Am I prepared? Is my mindset ready? Do I think that I would be sufficiently challenged in this role? Do I have executive leadership backing
Right.
to do the mandate that I've been given? Is the funding there?
Yep.
Like, there's so many different questions to ask, but it is, and obviously, unless you're facing a situation where you have to take whatever's in front of you, really do your due diligence on, is this the right fit,
Right.
and carefully consider, whether it is or not. So,
Yep.
when so you mentioned that you were one of two deputy directors responsible for the insider threat program at the Air
Mhm.
Force Hub in San Antonio. When did you start, I guess, getting the itch, so to speak, of, okay, it might be time to transition? And can you kind of walk us through that process?
Sure, definitely. And I'll be, I'm a very transparent person. A lot of folks that know me know, um, I don't hide much. I'm not surface level. I believe many of the things that we go through in life and through our journey, although they may hurt or feel good, they're not for us, right? They're so we can sort of look back and help others along their path and their walk, if you will, in this thing we called life. And I'll be honest and tell you that I'd had the itch for a while. I actually, when I was at DIA, prior to accepting the job with the Air Force, I had already interviewed for a few positions in corporate America, while up in the DC area. And when the Air Force job came along, it really, and again, man, you whether you want to call it fate or whatever it may be, I do believe that I do believe in a higher power, right? And I do believe that God had sort of a plan for me to return to San Antonio that I was unaware of, because we were able to come back home in a year prior to COVID, a year and a half prior to COVID happening, right? And so anyway, the I guess the final itch, if you will, or the itch that had me sort of make the decision to finally leave federal service happened in the midst of COVID. We were really having a lot of challenges there. I think throughout, I mean, globally, everybody was having challenges, right? But I had an individual that I used to work for approach me and say, "Hey, because of COVID, because of the pandemic, we're having these issues at our organization, and one of the things that the board is asking about is an insider threat program. And so we really need somebody who knows what they're doing to come in and help us get this thing going." It was an international firm, in over 40 countries. There was going to be a lot of challenges. And I'll be honest in that, even when and I have a couple of sort of points, if you will, or lessons learned I want to share, but one of them is that, to make sure you have mentors. But one of my mentors actually discouraged me and said, "Hey, that wouldn't be the first job I'd take coming out of coming out of federal service. It's a international firm. There's things, again, kind of a cautionary tale, right? Like, hey, there's some things you don't know. You think you know, but you really don't. You know, when you're in sort of the safety of the federal government, there's regulations, there's laws, there's things in place that help you sort of enforce certain things within the security industry and apparatus that exists, right? In corporate America, as you well know, probably a lot better than me, um, those things don't exist all the time, right? There are some things like OSHA and different types of things that companies have to do, but as far as having a wide variety or a diverse security program, many times it's really the organization has to really take a hard look at what the ROI is going to be or whatever that may be, right? And I've kind of gone down, I digressed a little bit, but Yeah, that itch came when that individual called and said, "Hey, this is what we're looking to do. What are your thoughts?" And so again, had to kind of pause and do some assessment about, is this something I want to do? Is this something I want to pursue? I honestly did not feel that my time serving in the U.S. government or serving our the federal government was over, but it was just a great opportunity. I'm always looking for the next challenge, to be honest with you, and sort of that next mountain to climb. And I love just building out programs and helping people out. And so it was just a great opportunity I couldn't pass up at the time.
I love that. Yeah, and that's something also that I want to bring up is, you know, every single person's, I guess, desires or, motivations
Mhm.
for, looking for a new job are different, and,
Definitely.
I used to, when I was fairly new in my corporate career, I mean, I still think I am, to be quite honest, but, like we're driven primarily by our perspective,
Yeah.
and our past and how we've interacted with certain things. And as I go further and further and higher up the corporate ladder, I gain additional perspective.
Mhm.
I gain more empathy. I gain additional introspection, like all these different qualities that help me hopefully make, more healthy and better informed choices, but also be able to evaluate things a little bit more, I would say, fairly,
Sure.
and I think it's really important just to keep in mind from people's perspectives that what may work well for you and what may be important to you may not be as important as someone else.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and keeping that in mind as we interact and as we evaluate all these different opportunities that are out there will hopefully allow you to make a really, really informed decision about what is truly best for you. And I really like, how you mentioned, like, that transparency is kind of like the bedrock of what of how you interact with people, how you communicate, etc. And I really think that served you pretty well, in your career.
Yeah, I've had people ask me, how is it and I'll give you a quick sort of anecdotal example, right? When I was on my joint duty assignment to FBI headquarters, the organization I was a part of had tried for years to sort of establish a position within FBI headquarters, and I was able to leverage relationships I had built with some great professionals that worked for the FBI, and not only help my organization at the time establish a position there, but really establish a foothold and help to craft information sharing documents with the FBI, right, and with the DOJ writ large. And I remember my boss asking me, like, "How did you do this?" And I really, I'll be honest with you, I didn't think it was that big of a deal, right? And I think because, to your point, I've always felt maybe it's a natural knack or whatever the case may be, but relationships have always been really important to me. And so just like you said, I mean, even when I first met you, you we're kind of like kindred spirits in that sense. Because I remember from the day I met you, and I remember coming home and sharing with my wife, because she had tried to call me while we were on the phone. She was like, "You didn't pick up," and I was like, "Yeah, I met this guy on LinkedIn, and we were talking the whole drive home. We spent like 45 minutes talking. He's a great guy. Like he's, up the street. And I think at the time you were with Dell.
Yep.
And I was like, this guy is like willing to bend over backwards for me. He's never even met me. And again, it just goes to your point. I think, the seeds we plant in people, man, just come back tenfold, right? And so I think I live by that same sort of mantra, right? I don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to sort of manipulate anyone and be self-serving in any way, shape, or form. And so I think it's just benefited me professionally. And so
Yeah. I
definitely
mean,
something I've done. You know what I mean? I didn't set out to do that. It just was kind of part of it was like you said. I mean, we all have a different journey. Part of it was how I was raised and just doing the right thing.
dude, I could talk about relationships like until the cows
Yeah.
come home. And it's like I tell almost every single person that I interact with, whether it's a paid service or whether it's a 30-minute phone call,
Sure.
that that relationships are literally the foundation of everything that we do.
Yep.
And I mean, if I could put that on my wall, and like just have it like engraved, I probably would, because it has impacted my life more than anything else in the world.
Yeah.
And it's impacted others' lives. And I mean, you can be the most highly skilled, most technically qualified person in the world, but you will never be as successful as you could be with the relationships,
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly. Yep.
and, you know, really, really highlighting that to people who are coming out of the government in any capacity, or just corporate to corporate in general. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are, investing in others and building intentional relationships will never be a waste of time,
Right. Right.
and I tell people like almost every day, like, you need to start talking to so and so, you need to start bending people's ear, you need to start understanding what the transition looks like for a lot of different people, and understand that it probably won't be the same for you, but you can still use that information to really hopefully not make as many mistakes. You're
Exactly.
still going to make mistakes. I mean, the transition
Right.
is
Right.
trial by fire,
Yeah.
and even if you have a relatively short transition, you get a job somewhere, it's still going to be a mindset switch,
Sure.
and, but man, leaning on people, building relationships, LinkedIn makes it super easy to do that. Like we've never met in person,
Right. Yeah.
but we built this relationship, we built this friendship,
Right.
and it's like I tell people all the time, especially guys who are coming out of law enforcement in the military,
Mhm.
we have that off on switch. We have that situational awareness. We have that, hey, if I haven't kicked down a door with you, then I don't trust you,
Right.
or, how does this whole like reaching out to people cold even work? Like, and I'm like, no, it works pretty well, actually. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
I
Yeah.
obviously, it's not 100%, obviously, but I mean, LinkedIn is like the only platform that I know of where you can reach out to someone and put a face with a name,
Right.
or say, hey, I'm interested in working at Microsoft. Let me find someone who works in the same position at
Right.
Microsoft and potentially hop on a phone call with them a couple of days later and say, hey, I'm super interested. What can you tell me about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Without knowing someone who can hook you up individually with someone at a company, LinkedIn is such a force multiplier.
Yeah, I was just
And
talking to someone. I was just talking to someone a couple weeks ago, and I jokingly said, "Hey, if foreign intelligence services are using this thing to target people, why don't you?" Like, it
exactly,
exists for professional networking. It's obviously being, to some extent, manipulated or exploited by our foreign adversaries, whatever the case may be. But to your point, it's a wealth of knowledge. You could easily reach out to someone that works at the same organization, and that's one of the things that I definitely would say is a lesson learned as well, or sort of a key point, right? Is and you hit on it. It's identify the organization that aligns with you, with your core values, or maybe there's an organization you want to work at. I mean, I know people sort of in the Silicon Valley industry or in the tech industry, they're like, hey, I want to get Facebook or Meta, right? Or Google or Apple. I want to get that on my resume, right? I want one of these large tech organizations. That way I can use that as leverage later on down the road. Well, there's hundreds, if not thousands of people, from that organization on LinkedIn. You could
yep,
easily, like you said, I mean, you've got to be professional about it.
sure,
Um, and sometimes it takes contacting 10 or 20 people before you get someone who'll respond, right? But there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, with sort of reaching out cold and just trying to get some
yeah,
information, because I think part of the mistake a lot of people make, and I've made this mistake as well, is not understanding a company's culture, not understanding everything you see publicly may not align with, like I said, with your core values or your principles. There may be things that for whatever reason there just may not line up with the type of organization you want to work for. right? So that's
Absolutely.
as well. Like you said, do your
I,
research.
I can't tell you how many times a day I tell someone this information, but it's if you reach out to someone and they don't respond or they tell you to pound sand, you have not lost a single thing.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
you're no better off than you were before.
Yep.
But if someone says, hey, absolutely, I'd love to share with you my story, or I see that we share a common background,
Right.
like
Right.
how much more likely are you to potentially build a relationship with someone and learn more about, is this a place where I want to invest 40 hours, if not more, of my life?
Right. Right.
And like I said, I know it's I don't know if the right word is frightening, but I know
Mhm.
it's anxiety inducing. It's scary in some respects to
Right.
seek a completely different home, with new rules, new environment, new language, all the above. But there's help
Mhm.
and it's right in front of you, which is LinkedIn,
Right.
you know? And
Yep.
so, I know that you've been in your new role at one of the biggest hotel chains in the world for, how long has it been now?
So I've been there a little over a year now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like what was your process to get there? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because it's the first job I've had professionally where I didn't know someone at the organization prior to going. And so when
Hmm.
you talk about, the amount of stress or everything that's involved with not only transitioning somewhere, but transitioning to an organization where maybe you don't know the ins and outs of the organization, you don't know someone there who could help you, right, provide some insight or some perspective. Um, it is the first job in my 25-year career where I did not know a single person. Now, I can say, I can tell you that the process from the time I was contacted by the recruiter and the interview process and just talking with everyone was really what solidified the decision for me for a number of reasons. But I think the important thing to maybe highlight is kind of what I mentioned before, right? I love helping organizations out, especially as it relates to security programs. Marriott was dealing with trying to advance and mature their security program, and this was one area where they were hoping to get some help in. And so, as I spoke to some of the executive team there, it just really felt like a really good fit. And then I think one of the important things, like you said, because I've definitely had a number of people ask me, I spent the majority of my career doing national security related stuff in national security related positions, right? Um, you know, counterintelligence operations and espionage investigations and that kind of stuff for the majority of my career. To then go and work for a hotel chain is kind of night and day. It's kind of on the extreme version of organizations to work for, if you will. But what I have found is that, and we talked a little bit about this offline, is every company has a need for a security program in some way, shape, or form, right? And every company exists. They're serving or providing a service, if you will, especially in our society, right? When we live in a country that really strives on capitalism. Companies are only going to make it if they're providing something that someone else is not, right? And so there are things that they do. They may not be, we don't make widgets, we don't build stealth aircraft or anything like that, but we definitely have a wealth of information and access to customer information that's very sensitive. And so, I was just really inspired by the level of buy-in from the leadership at all levels and their willingness to do the right thing to secure the organization from top to bottom. And so that was really the deciding factor. It was the things that the executive leadership was saying and what their priorities were and how that lined up with where I was at the time in my career. And then just the challenge. right? When I look back, um, it's somewhat, as I mentioned earlier, right? It's whether it's in the military or the U.S. government, there are again laws and policies and things that help you in those types of positions, right? If you're serving in the U.S. military or even as a federal civilian, I mean, you have gates, guns, and fences, right? I mean, there's things to help you protect. There's classified buildings to help you protect sensitive information. In my mind, I'll be honest, and this is sort of an ego thing here, but I thought, man, if I could protect or help to protect a hotel company, right?
Mm.
I mean, talk about a huge challenge, right? And so anyway, yeah, it's been a great ride so far. I love the culture of the organization. There's definitely a balance also that I was looking for in the sense of quality of life. I have young children, right? And I think you mentioned this earlier. Sometimes quality of life or some level of flexibility in an organization could be a higher priority for some versus others. So, like I mentioned earlier, you want to find an organization that aligns with where you're at in your life, where you're at, and what you're looking for. So yeah, it's definitely been a great fit.
I love to hear it, man. I think that says it perfectly. There's nothing else that I can add that would truly add a lot of value. But one thing I do want to focus on, if you'll indulge me,
Sure.
is I think a lot of people who are coming out of the government or just people in general, they see words like insider threat, insider risk, workplace violence, all
Hmm.
these buzzwords bandied about, and sometimes there's a lot of overlap. And so, you know, from your perspective, when you talk about your job from an insider threat perspective, how do you define insider threat?
Oh man, what a great question. And there is, I've again been lucky enough. One of the organizations that I participate in is kind of another. This is great, man. We didn't even talk about this. It's almost like it's scripted, but one of the other tips that I would share with individuals who are transitioning is make sure that you get involved with professional organizations, right? So,
Yes.
find, you know, once you figure out what you want to do, figure out what professional organizations exist, right? So whether it's a CFE, if you're interested in fraud, so certified fraud examiner, uh, organization, or if you mentioned insider threat, there are a number of insider threat related organizations that exist. Um, there is a lot of what I would call gray space, Eric. I think is probably the best way to describe it, right? When you talk about insider threat, insider risk, I do prefer to use the term insider risk. There's probably 5 or 6 years ago, a couple of us in the industry or who were in positions within the U.S. government tried to get that changed. The problem we faced was it was codified in executive order, and so because it's a law, it gets pretty difficult to change one term, right? Just because you don't like the way it's the terminology behind it.
Mm.
But one of the organizations, and this is what I was going to mention a little while ago, was one of the organizations that I participate with is INSA, and they have a subcommittee for insider threat. And we wrote a white paper related to the terminology because there is a little bit of confusion and lack of understanding of what insider threat means. For me, in layman's terms, if you will, insider threat is really someone using their authorized access, whether it's logical or physical, right? Um, to basically disrupt business operations, right? And so that could be intentional or unintentional. I know there's enough vendors to drive you crazy with their own definitions, but in my opinion, if you really simplify it, it's someone with authorized access, right? So an insider, I would consider somebody you've provided authorized access to this individual. It could be, again, especially in today's world, right? It could be virtual. could actually be someone with a badge to get into a building, that causes some type of disruption to business operations, whether intentional or intentional. That could be, there's a variety of ways people have broken down incidents, or incident categories, I should say. But it's things like fraud, it's things like sabotage, it's things like espionage. You mentioned workplace violence. That's another very critical type of incident type, right? And I think there's organizations, I have a real good friend that actually just went to work for Kroger to stand up their threat assessment program. So not insider threat, but behavioral threat assessment. And that's where I think we've had a lot of talk in sort of our community about the overlap between like behavioral threat assessment and insider threat, right?
Right.
And again, like ATAP's a great resource for individuals in that space, whether it's workplace violence. Many organizations, as you mentioned, workplace violence, many organizations are standing up threat assessment programs. And so, but yeah, to answer your question, I hope that sort of provides.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know exactly who you're talking about from Kroger's perspective, because one of my former clients is on his team now, and
okay,
could not be happier for that individual, that she found not only a job out of law enforcement, but found such a fantastic fit.
yeah,
And she posts all the photos on LinkedIn all the time, and I'm like, yay, you found something that not only is a good fit for you and your family, but it's something that you really enjoy. And I
right.
think that that's something that just cannot be taken for granted. So what would you say are kind of like, go
Yeah,
ahead.
let me
Yeah.
hit on that, man, because I think I won't cast generic aspersions, right? But in my experience, and in my opinion, I think that's why I mentioned the importance of figuring out what you want to do and who you want to do it for. And I think
Mhm.
it's often minimized, right? And I'll give you an example. Um, you know, Many folks join the military either right out of high school or shortly thereafter. I joined shortly thereafter, right? And could be, I've met individuals who have spent 25, 30 years in the military or serving in federal government service that aren't passionate about what they do. And it's easy to get caught up, I think especially as because we join so early and we don't really know ourselves. We don't know what we're passionate about at that age, right? Very few anyway are mature enough to realize what they want to do in life, right? At that point. I know I didn't. And so you could easily end up with a resume of 25 years of blah, of
Yeah,
like, I hate this, but I re-enlisted, or I stayed in the department because it was putting food on the table. We had I built my family. Now, I mean, can you imagine trying to make some type of huge career pivoting shift when you have to feed kids and, uh, uh, your wife or whatever the case may be, right? And
exactly.
so anyway, but I would encourage anyone that if you're in a situation where it's just not something you're passionate about, don't make a bold decision to try to do something else. I think especially within corporate security, one of the things that I know I've learned is there's so many things you could do, right? You could be a program manager, you could be a policy guy, you could be you can actually be some type of responder, like, similar to sort of being on the beat in law enforcement, right? But there's so many different opportunities just within the security industry that I know I've learned about. And it's just, you could be in security awareness and training, which is almost like being a teacher, right? And so again, you can go serve at an academy, right? A law enforcement academy, if you don't want to be maybe in some other positions. There's different administrative positions that support corporate security positions. So anyway, I say all that to say, man, find what it is you want to do in life, and whatever it is
Yeah.
you're passionate about, pursue that. Because like you mentioned, the one individual who was a client of yours. It is just amazing when people end up in positions that really serve them well because they serve the organization well, right? And so it's definitely pleasing to see that.
I couldn't agree more. And, a lot of how we get that level of knowledge is through our relationships,
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
to keep, circling back to relationships. And so, um, I really appreciate you sharing about insider threat. I was first exposed to, insider threat when I worked at Dell.
Mm,
And, one of my good friends that I met at Dell was Chris Jones.
hmm.
And, Chris was building out the insider threat program at Dell. And specifically, I was privileged to, be involved with the intellectual property
Right.
aspect of the program. And I was just blown away.
Hmm.
Like there's so many, like just like corporate security, there's so many different aspects of
Right.
insider risk
Right.
that so many people just, at least for me, my perspective, I didn't think about.
Sure.
And understanding how comprehensive a program can be, obviously depending on, where the risks are for each company,
Right.
was something that really just caused me to have a almost a deep-seated fascination with
Yeah.
insider risk, just because, like I've always been involved in physical security and crisis management and a lot of other roles, but the one thing that we are constantly told is that the number one risk to an organization are its people,
Right.
which for a lot of people just sound counterproductive. They're
Right.
like, hold on, now we're the enemy, we work here,
Right.
and so
Yeah.
there's that constant like struggle to redefine no, most people are not, but we have to understand
Yep.
the inherent risk that our
Exactly.
employees face,
Right.
not only from an intentional
Mhm.
perspective, but from an unintentional perspective.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
Phishing being a super,
Yeah.
you know, one of the easiest ways that a threat actor can get into our networks. You know, um, and again, I could go on and on. This is something that I really enjoy talking about. But um, what aspects of the insider threat program are you like super passionate about?
It's just that what you just said. It's it's the people thing, and like I was sharing, I'm such an extrovert. And I just have a passion for people, um, and the journey they're going through. And I think oftentimes what we miss, and I think I'll say this, where I've seen people make mistakes in the insider threat community is when they build out programs either hyper focused on one sort of discipline that is involved, right? So whether it's technology or cyber, or whether it's solely on physical security side, whatever the case may be. But also when they build out programs um, that are geared as hammers looking for nails instead of looking for ways to be helpful, right? And so my philosophy has always been, to your point, and it's interesting, you use very similar language that I've used for a number of years, but it's that we all bring inherent risk to the table. We all do, right? So I know you're a dad, I'm a dad, right? That's, I mean, whether you like it or not, that's risk, right? There's risk involved when I have to, when I worked in DC, when I have to commute 2 hours in bumper to bumper traffic, right, up to the Pentagon or wherever the case may be, I'm coming to work stressed out now, right? And so I may make a mistake and click on a link that I shouldn't. And so to your, to use your phishing example, right? Um, Conversely, I mean, just the stressors of the job, and for those in law enforcement, when you go home, and we all do it, we all sort of bring those things home, whether no matter how hard you try, right? um
Absolutely.
Bring those experiences home. It's who you are. And so you bring stress into the household, and you know as well as I do that the morning you leave your house after an argument with your wife, for whatever reason, your day is entirely different, or at least your morning is, right? It's entirely different than when you leave and everything is, there's harmony, everything was perfect, right? I mean,
Yep.
breakfast was perfect, your coffee was perfect, you're on the road, there's no traffic, and you make it to roll call with absolutely no issues whatsoever, right? Like just a better day,
Yeah.
right? And so your stress is down, and so the risk that you present is going to be different. So anyway, um, I just love the challenge, right? And sort of what I'm enamored with is teaching people that don't know or understand about insider risk, just teaching them about the discipline itself, and just trying to sort of be an evangelist, if you will, for the discipline, right? For people to realize that, hey, the nomenclature does sound bad. Let's all be honest, right? And even insider risk, as soft as that is, it still doesn't sound good, right?
Yeah.
People will still say, okay, instead of saying, well, okay, insider threat, you view me as a threat. Okay, so I'm a risk. And yes, you can have that conversation and explain that out. It still carries some negative connotation. But I think
Yeah.
to answer your question, I love, again, a part of probably security writ large, to be honest with you, Eric. But I know in insider risk, insider threat, definitely, oftentimes the education piece is minimalized. It's not as prioritized as it should be, and I think the great programs, security awareness and training, is a pillar of the program, and it's a priority, right? To make sure that, hey, the workforce understands who we are, what we're about, what we're trying to do, and what we're not trying to do, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
a great mentor of mine, Doug Thomas, who I will call out by name because he's just a great individual, who I would do anything for. And he stood up one of the first insider threat programs in cleared industry. One of the first things he did, and I've really taken this and used it myself, but he had sort of a focus group come in and talk to folks at the organization he was at, and they got rid of words like report and suspicious behavior. And so they further defined that stuff, and it was about engaging security or participating in the security program, right? I mean, if you think about it, in our Western culture, right, we're raised to, snitches get stitches and don't tattletale. And then you
Yep.
go work for some organization, whether it's the military or, in the intelligence community, whatever it may be. And one of the first things you get told is, well, hey, if you see anything suspicious, make sure you report that. So it goes psychologically, it goes against everything you've been taught prior to that, So anyway, yeah, I just love the people aspect about it, man. Again, I apologize for going down that rabbit hole, but
No,
it's
no,
it's 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 just been a great sort of great community to be a part of. It's complex, it's complicated. I love the challenge. It'd be interesting to see where we go in the next 10 or 15 years as the community starts to professionalize with different certifications and those type of things.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's definitely an ever evolving process, and it's important to keep aware of what the industry trends
Mhm.
are, and what's emerging and how that's affecting current practices, risk profiles, etc.
Sure.
Um, as we start to wrap up the podcast, I have a couple of final questions for you. And the first is, what advice would you give to people who are either in the transition process now or currently considering that?
Yeah, I think I would hit on sort of some of the things we've talked about, right? Decide what you want to do, like specifically, as specific as you can get. Decide what you want to do. There's so many things in security, like we've talked about, right? You could be a fraud investigator, you could be an insider threat professional, you could be in physical security. There's just so many things. What is it that you're passionate about? And then once you've decided that, like I mentioned earlier, figure out where the professional, if you're not already a part of those professional organizations and maybe don't have that training, figure out what exists in that space join the professional organization, make contacts, right? Network with those individuals. If you don't have that training, make a plan to get that training. Most organizations aren't gonna bring you on if you don't have at least the basic knowledge or training in that space. Apart from that, like I said earlier, also, just identify the companies or organizations that align with that. I do think, I was listening to a couple of the podcasts earlier in the year, and someone mentioned that corporate may not be for everybody. And I do think that's true. I do think that the gray space of corporate America is not for everybody. Some of us require more structure and more, like, as I mentioned, sort of those guardrails. And that's okay. That's okay, right? Like, that's not failure. Realizing where you fit in this world is actually success. But I would identify those companies that align with your core values. Find a resource or a mentor like yourself, right? Somebody that can help you, maybe that's been down that path before, or someone that can point you in the right direction. And then the last thing I would just add is, hey man, delay is not denial. Realize that you may have to take a step down or back if you're really committed to a specific role, if you don't want to be like a generalist in security or whatever the case may be. But if you really are focused in on a specific position, or type of position, I should say, within the security discipline, realize you may have to take a circuitous route to get there, right? You may have to take a role in policy or a role in security awareness and training. If you want to be a fraud investigator, maybe the organization isn't looking for that right now. Get in the door. Just get in the door. If that's truly the organization you want to go work for, get in the door, and then figure out a way or build a plan with your manager on how to get there.
Awesome. Second question I have is, I know we touched on, how to get involved with Insider Threat, and ATAP is obviously a fantastic organization. But one of the things that I hear consistently from people is, okay, well, beyond joining the organization, is there training that I can take to further my threat management aspirations? And beyond the certified threat manager certification and the Carnegie Mellon one, is there any corporate training specifically geared toward providing an overview of threat management, or allowing people just to build further awareness that you would recommend?
Yeah, and I want to be careful. I don't want to discourage folks. One of my frustrations that I'll share, that I've seen in the community for years, is definitely, there's a need for exactly what you're saying, right? There's obviously a need for it, and that gap, or that need, has been filled by individuals and vendors that don't necessarily know what they're doing, or who have never done insider threat. And that's definitely, as a professional, like any profession, right? When you see folks taking advantage of situations and claiming to do things that they don't have experience, any profession would be sort of frustrated by that, right? What I would say is, like you said, the Carnegie Mellon training exists, and it's very good. The University of Maryland has a certification that they just released within their within ARLIS, which is the Applied Research Lab for, I think it's for information security. I could definitely get you the link to be posted with this podcast. But ARLIS is now, they were the benefactor of years of work that was done by the Department of Defense for their internal certification program. And so that it was actually recently released for basically the public. I actually think it was just last week, if not week before. The other thing I would say is there's a couple of organizations I do trust as it relates to insider threat or insider risk. I would definitely read Eric Shaw's. He just released a book, but he also wrote a white paper that a couple of years back, probably over a decade now, that many of individuals have used and referenced as a staple for the insider threat community. and it's called the critical pathway to insider risk. It's very similar to Calhoun and Weston's pathway to violence, right? And so, but it's a little more focused in on insider threat, insider risk. So I would read anything Eric Shaw wrote, to be honest with you.
Okay.
He's a great individual. He has no sort of maligned agenda or motivation, right? He's truly just a great individual, great professional. I know he does some work with Signpost. I know they're overseas. I can't remember exactly where they're located. I've never taken their training, but I've heard a lot of great things about their training. So I would definitely
Awesome.
drop
Yeah,
a note.
I just looked up the certification that you're referring to from UMD, which is the Global Counter Insider Threat Professional Certification Program, and I'm just like, whoa, super peaked now. It says registration is opening in September. I'm definitely gonna reach out because I'm super interested in it from my own professional development perspective, and I'll make sure to post a link when we post this podcast on LinkedIn and other places as well. But really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean DCSA, right? They have CDSC, which is their education arm. There's a lot of free stuff on their site, I'm sure, as you know. And then the other place that has done research in this space is PERSEREC, the Personnel Security Research Center out in California. And they have the threat lab that Stephanie Yarrow stood up. And so there's a lot of free things out there. What I always tell folks is read. Get out and just read. The more you want to know about insider threat, like read, right? Read incidents. Look at the Tesla just, filed
I saw that.
Two folks, right? Like all those are use cases, right? Yep. If you're interested in this, those are the things you got to read. Read the indictments. A good friend of mine, Stacy Moy, who still works for the FBI out in California, they just the DOJ just indicted 2 Navy individuals, right, for committing espionage. Read those indictments. See those things will give you perspective. Now, again, depending on where you go work, right, those things will give you perspective into insider threat and the types of things that insider threat programs, depending on the organization, could in fact focus on, right? So those are all relevant. They're happening every single week, right? Not a week goes by that we don't hear about somebody, again, intentionally or unintentionally, like you mentioned. I mean, there's a number of organizations that have had unintentional incidents that are even relevant to insider threat, right? So, I would just say read. Be careful what vendor. I'm more than willing, if anybody reaches out, I'm more than willing to provide my thoughts on different vendors. I just would rather not post those publicly.
Sure, of course, absolutely, yeah. Say no more, and nor would I ask you to do so in a public forum. But yeah, that sounds great, and I feel like I've learned so much just through this, the past hour conversation that we've had, and it just goes to show you. That 2 people having a conversation about shared interest can just really open up a lot of doors, but also like cause us to think in different ways. Sure. And, I've learned multiple things that I'm going to take with me to my job. I hope you've learned things as well. And I just really want to thank you for not only being willing to share your valuable time, but also being willing to share your story with the hope that it helps at least one person make a more informed decision. Yeah,
definitely. And I think, like you said, relationships are so critical. I know we're getting ready to wrap up. What I would, the only thing, if like I said earlier, I'm more than willing to help anyone out. I mean, anybody who hears this, in the near term or in the future, 10 years from now, if I'm still around, more than willing to help anybody out as in any way, shape, or form. I'm here as a resource for folks. Like you said earlier, better to learn from someone else's, challenges and even mistakes, right? So you don't make them on your own. And so, really, Eric, I just thank you for what you do, for the security community. Definitely, we've benefited because of who you are as a person. and because of your passion. And so I really thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate that, and that means more to me than you'll most likely ever know. And I'm just honored to be able to be in this position to pay it forward, as so many people did for me when I made the transition out. So, JT, thanks again for being here. Thanks again for sharing your story and your wisdom with us. And I can't wait to see what kind of feedback we get from people who get the privilege of listening to your story as many times as they want to.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot.